and our 13 members of the North Carolina House delegation in Washington, you've got folks that you call go-to people. And we call them go-to people. Those are members that we go to on a daily basis, an hourly basis. We have the kind of relationship and friendship with over the years that we feel comfortable just putting us out there and say it and getting feedback, whether it's what we ask them to do or what they ask us to do. We have that type of relationship. Our next guest this morning is just that such person. It's my pleasure to introduce Congressman David Rouzer. David Rouzer, I know, has committed his life and his career really to promoting North Carolina and North Carolina agriculture. He is North Carolinian through and through. David's a Johnston County native who comes from a farming family. He has a distinguished career of public service, including working with 2 United States senators. I remember very well David Rouzer was on the staff of both Senator Helms and Senator Elizabeth Dole. He served 2 years in the North Carolina Senate, where he was certainly a go-to person there for agriculture and business. And now he's in his 2nd term representing North Carolina's 7th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives. David's district includes counties. Many of those counties in his district sustained the heaviest damage from Hurricane Florence. He has led discussions on federal disaster relief pertaining to some help for North Carolina. He also serves on the House Ag Committee and is key to the negotiation of the new Farm Bill. Certainly, David Rouzer for us is important, and he is an influential voice in Congress on behalf of North Carolina Farm Bureau and North Carolina Agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, David Rouzer. David.
Well, thank you, Larry, for that very nice introduction. And as he was giving the introduction, I was reminiscing in my mind about my very first visits to this annual meeting. And of course, those were back during the days when I was with Senator Helms. And boy, do I miss those days in many respects. I certainly miss Jesse Helms. I wish he were still here. He's the type of senator that you wish could hang around for 200 years in the United States Senate. Which reminds me, I went to a CPAC convention in 1996, and that's when Bob Dole was on the ballot. And I remember they had all these bumper stickers out there, Larry, and one of them said, Helms Thurman, why waste more than 200 years of experience? And but those were the good old days when you had Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and Sam Nunn from Georgia and Hal Heflin from Alabama. The United States Senate back then was a very different body than it is today. And the politics back then was very different than it is today. And so anyhow, when you were given that introduction, my mind floated back to those early days when Senator Helms and I would work on his remarks that he was going to give to the convention here, and he always enjoyed this meeting, I think, more than any other. And he loved you all very, very much, and of course, practically everything I know in life came from my years with Helms. I had a great education, grew up in a great family, great church, etc., but I don't think I ever learned any more over a 4 or 5 year period of time than I did when I was with Senator Helms. You know, some things stay the same. There have always been challenges in agriculture, significant challenges. In fact, I can't remember a time during the course of my career when there wasn't a challenge. When I started with Senator Helms, it was the onslaught against tobacco every which way that you could think of. It was challenge after challenge after challenge. But this year, I have to say, and I shared this with the House leadership team not long ago, I don't think I've ever seen a period of time where there were more challenges facing agriculture all at one point as there are right now. 4 or 5 years of depressed commodity prices, obviously that's been a challenge. Hurricane Florence, as Larry mentioned, I have 9 counties in my district. All 9 were federally declared disaster areas. 8 of the 9 counties were flooded in one way or the other. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of agriculture in my district. And so I shared with the House leadership team not long ago, I said, you consider 4 or 5 years of depressed prices. You've got a hurricane, another 500 or 1,000-year flooding event in my district. You've got nuisance lawsuits that are hanging out there, particularly as it relates to the pork industry, but it's very clearly a very slippery slope that could spread to many other sectors of agriculture. You have a 80-cent increase in the adverse effect wage rate, and those of you who have labor, 90% of you do, if not more, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's a real killer moving forward. And then on top of all that, you've got trade issues, and I'm one of those that support the president and what he's trying to do. I'll tell you right now, and in fact, if you go back and you look at some of the statements that Helms made in the 80s, and in fact, I have a copy of a letter between him and Jim Hunt back in 1984, where Helms laid out what was going to develop with China long term. And they have a mission, they have a goal. Let me state this very plainly. They want to dominate the world economy. They want to be the dominant power. They want to surpass the United States of America. They have a 30-year plan to do so. And they are implementing that plan step by step. They are moving forward with what I would call a silent invasion all around this world. And I am grateful to have a president that stands up and says, hey, no more. We're going to force you to the negotiating table, and we're going to cut some better deals. The problem we have in agriculture is an easy industry to retaliate against. And the president's well aware of that. We've got our good friend Ray Starling, who was there in the White House and now Chief of Staff over at USDA to Sonny Perdue. And Sonny Perdue, let me tell you, my interactions with him have just really reinforced my impression of what a solid, great advocate for agriculture that we have in Secretary Sonny Perdue. And we're really blessed as a state and as an industry to have Ray Starling there as his chief of staff. And we work constantly with Ray and Sonny and the folks over at the White House to make sure they know what is taking place at the ground level as they move forward in these negotiations, whether it's a renegotiation of NAFTA or whether it's bringing China back to the table to cut better deals. And I want to, with all that, all those challenges I just laid out, I want to share this with you. I believe by the end of this year, we're going to have a very, very good farm bill. Going to be a much improved safety net over what we have now. As Ted Budd mentioned, we're in the final stages of getting that wrapped up. I believe by Christmas, we will have a new farm bill that will be sent to the president and signed into law. It's not going to have everything in there that we want in terms of the food stamp reforms. As many of you believe, if you work, you should be better off than if you don't work. How many of you believe that? If you work, you ought to be better off than if you don't work. I think we all do. I all believe that. But you got to have the incentives right. And that's one of the problems with government is the incentives are never right. They're always backwards. Whatever they should be, you can guarantee that the federal government's got it backwards. That's just a constant. That's just a constant truth. And that's a battle, that we face all the time. So with this farm bill, we're trying to get those incentives right. Well, the Senate, they didn't have the same provisions in the SNAP portion of the farm bill that the House did. And as a result, what's going to come out in conference is not going to be necessarily as good as we would like for it to be on that front. But the agriculture part of this farm bill is going to be a big improvement over what we've had in law during the last 4 or 5 years. And so that's going to be a win. I also believe we're going to have a disaster package, not only for those who suffered from Hurricane Florence and Michael, but those all throughout the agriculture sector. We're working very, very hard to have an ag disaster component for that as well. Along with that, we're working on language to freeze that increase in the adverse effect wage rate for a 2-year period, coupled with a study. And if we can get that, quite honestly, it will be a great godsend. That is one of the biggest challenges that you all face, and all others who are involved in production agriculture face, and that are using the H-2A program, is that annual increase in the wage rate. We recognize that, and we are working very hard to get a freeze put in place. Now, I can't predict that it's going to happen, but there's more. I have more optimism about it today than I did 2 weeks ago. Let me put it that way. So keep your fingers crossed and pray really hard, because let me tell you, prayer matters. And I remember all those days when everybody said, "Oh, you can't get a tobacco quota buyout done." And we not only worked hard, we prayed hard, and it happened. But I believe that we got an opportunity here to possibly get a freeze on this AWR. We're keeping our fingers crossed and doing everything that we know to do to try to help make that happen. And then finally, we do have language that we are working on. Senator Tillis's office has been, and Burr's office as well, have been working very, very closely with us on all these measures. Those are two great supporters and proponents of agriculture and of the American Farm Bureau family and the North Carolina Farm Bureau family in particular. And we are working hard to put in place some language. Now, I don't know, this is going to be the toughest hurdle for us to cross, but we're working hard to see if we can't put in place some language that says if you are abiding by all the federal rules and regulations and all state rules and regulations, then by golly, you ought to have some safe harbor from lawsuits, particularly trial lawyers that come in here from the state of Texas to try to turn everything upside down. Now, one of the things that I learned when I was in the state legislature was that whether you're Republican or Democrat, if you're a lawyer first. And so that makes our challenge a little tougher. And of course, I say that in jest, but I've got a lot of friends in the House Republican Conference, and as well as in the Democrat Conference there in Washington, and I like to rib them a little bit on that matter. But the truth of the matter is, I don't see how anybody could have any grievance against anyone who has done everything by the book from a federal regulatory standpoint, has done everything by the book from a state regulatory standpoint. There's no reason for that person to have any kind of legal liability whatsoever hanging over their head. That's the bottom line. And it's just called good common sense. And so we're pushing forward on this thing. That's going to be the tallest hurdle of all the things that I've just outlined. Farm Bill, I feel very good about. Florence Ag Disaster Recovery, I feel very good about. I think we're going to have something by the end of the year. I am optimistic on a freeze of the AWR, but keep your fingers crossed and pray hard for us on that. But we're working hard on it. And then these nuisance lawsuits, that's a much tougher challenge legislatively to get that put in place. But if we don't get it put in place by the end of this year, we're going to keep working on that. I can guarantee you we are going to keep working on that, because there is no reason why any producer out there that complies with federal and state rules and regulations should have anything to fear when it comes to federal suit. I want to close by saying this. I know the American Farm Bureau is soon to be celebrating the 100th anniversary, and I've thought about this many, many times, long before I ever knew it was going to be the 100th anniversary. Where would the United States of America be without agriculture? Yes, where would this country be without agriculture? And then where would agriculture be without the American Farm Bureau and the North Carolina Farm Bureau specifically. You all have a lot to be proud of. A lot to be proud of. You should congratulate yourselves. Go ahead. You all are the leaders and the movers and shakers in your community all around this state. You have contributed mightily in every regard. And I know there's a lot of times, and I think about this when you're flying over North Carolina at night and you're in the plane and you look down and you see all those lights below you. And you think to yourself, all those lights represent individuals and individual families. And there are many times I have wondered when I've looked down Larry Wooten and looked at all those lights below, and you think about all the just a huge number of people that are in this state and all the folks that want to come to this state. And you look and you get into more rural parts and you see the lights and you look down, and many times I've thought, as I look down upon those lights, and I've thought to myself, they probably don't think anybody in Washington, D.C. cares about them. Well, I'm here to tell you that there are still people in Washington, D.C. who care about you. You've got two great United States senators that care a lot about you, and you have a North Carolina delegation that is committed to the betterment of our rural communities and agriculture in this state. And you should be proud of the folks that you all work hard for to get elected to Congress on both sides, because we work with all of them. But there really are a number of good people in Washington that care about those folks represented by those lights as you fly over this state and many other states. So with that, let me wish you a great and Merry Christmas. Keep your fingers crossed. We're going to continue to work hard. May God bless you, and may God always bless America. Thank you very much.